It's time to tell a story of my home, Maui. Alright, so this is a book written by a friend of the family when I was in Hawaii a long time ago. He's a world famous musician. His name is George Kahumoku Jr. He wrote a book. He gave this one to my grandma. I put a little special note in there a long time ago. And I'm going to read a story. So here we go. A fishy hotel. I grew up in kind of rustic surroundings. Nobody in my family had ever had much money, and I am pretty used to raising and hunting my own food and cooking it over an open fire. In the early 70s, I built my first house in Kahuna. I had a big fight with my wife, that was wife number 2, Malama, about bathrooms. I had planned for a nice 4-hole outhouse perfectly located just outside the back door, but not too close. She wanted to have a toilet right inside the house. I finally had to give in. It was my first house with a flush toilet. In 1992, I was farming in Kona and playing music with my son Kioki at the Mauna Kea Beach Hotel. The Mauna Kea is a 5-star hotel and they paid us really well. Then they decided to shut it down in the beginning of November for a year of renovations, so we were going to lose that income. That was kind of painful. Even though I was considered myself a farmer more than a musician, it was going to be tough getting along without the extra money I made playing music. To be honest with myself, I was making money playing music so I could lose it on the farming. I had other gigs besides the Mauna Kea, but that was the one that really paid good money. There was a guy named Steve Shalit who used to be with the Mauna Kea Beach Motel. And now he was general manager of the Westin at Kaanapali on Maui. He had heard that my son and I were going to be out of a job in a couple of weeks, so he invited us to come over to Maui. I couldn't imagine leaving the farm, but this guy kept insisting. He told us that no one was playing Hawaiian music in Kaanapali. Everything was reggae and other island music, but not from our islands. He really liked the stuff he used to hear me play at the Mauna Kea, real Hawaiian music. He asked us to come over and try it out for a couple of weeks, see if we liked it there. Finally, we agreed to come over for a weekend. He flew us in with our wives, paid for the plane tickets and everything. We arrived at the Kapalua airport, and there was a big limo there to take us to the hotel. I have to say, we enjoyed that. We stayed in a really nice room at the hotel. Everything was on the house. We had all this food, all free lunches, the seafood buffet. It was great. At night, we played music. But on Monday, we had to go back to Kona. There were still 4,000 tea leaves to pack every week and 1,200 pigs to feed, and all kinds of other stuff to take care of on the farm. We were used to working 20 hours a day, and the guy from the West End wanted us to come back to Maui as soon as possible. And we said, yeah, we'll call you back. But I knew I was never going to call him back. Because how could I leave my farm? How could I leave my coffee, my tea leaves, and 1,200 pigs? Right about this time, I had trouble with one of my big boars. I was in the pen with him one morning, and instead of mounting one of the sows, he decided to try to mount me. This kind of thing happens once in a while. And I was carrying a pole with wire loop on the end. It was a pretty standard device for controlling an uncooperative animal. When I tried to get the loop around his head, the wire caught on his tusk. He started whipping his head side to side, trying to shake the thing off, and he jerked the pole out of my hand. This was an 800-pound animal, and he was furious. I was trying to get a hold of the pole, and I got hit hard in the arm several times before I got him under control. I was pretty bruised up, but hell, that's farming for you. About 10 days later, a couple days after Thanksgiving, I was getting ready to feed my pigs, carrying 4 5-gallon buckets of slop, 2 in each hand. All of a sudden, I couldn't feel anything. My arms went numb. Boom! I dropped the buckets I was carrying in my left hand. I started feeling very dizzy, and I put everything down and sat on the ground. I tried to get up, but I couldn't do it. The pigs knew it was time to eat, and that I had the food. I usually can feed my whole herd in less than 20 minutes, but I was sitting there next to the pens with 1,200 pigs screaming and yelling for their food. Fortunately, there was lots of my ohana, my family, around the place. My niece, Pomakai, was feeding some other pigs, but she noticed all the noise and came over to see what was going on. She saw me sitting on the ground and she said, "Uncle, are you all right?" I said, "Yeah." And I tried to stand up one more time. This time I fell flat on my face. I just couldn't get up. My niece ran and got some of my cousins. They carried me to the car and drove me to the hospital. The doctors did a bunch of tests and found a blood clot in my arm that had traveled and stuck itself in the right side of my neck, and I had an aneurysm. I was at the hospital for a couple of weeks. For a while, I had no feeling in my left hand, and my speech was slurred. My cousins were covering my music gigs for me, but I was getting kind of worried about how I was going to play music. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I started trying to play music again. I knew I would have to find a way to do it. At first, I couldn't even hold a guitar. What I did was I put my arm and hand in the sling so I could hold the instrument. But I could only play with 2 fingers on my right hand. I had to relearn how to play with just 2 fingers. It took some practice, but I finally taught myself some new techniques. And pretty soon, I could play about everything I needed to play. After a while, I began to use all of my fingers back. To this day, I still play with just 2 fingers sometimes. My doctor said I couldn't keep up the kind of activity I was doing. He told me that if I didn't change my lifestyle, I was going to die. So from the hospital, I called the guy at the Westin back and told him we'd come over at the beginning of the year. On December 25th, I got out of the hospital. I told Kiyoki we planned on going for over a month and to check things out. I had already started turning over the farm operations to my nephews. So in January of 1993, we moved into a beautiful room overlooking the ocean on the 11th floor of the Westin Kanapali Hotel on Maui. My son and I lived in the hotel for about 6 months, commuting home by plane to be in Kona on Sunday and Monday. It was a little strange because we were the only native Hawaiians staying in this huge 750-room hotel. It's a pretty expensive place. And as the rooms were rented, they kept us moving from one room to another. Each time we'd move to a new room, we'd take the chips, expensive tins of nuts, and fancy chocolates out of the minibar, and replace it with our own snacks. Seaweed from the rocks near the hotel, sea urchins, poi, and other stuff we liked to eat. As we moved around over the months, we were getting lower and lower in the hotel. After 6 months, our room was on the 4th floor overlooking the parking lot. We had come down a little over 1 floor a month. Whenever we moved, we couldn't help noticing differences in luggage. Everyone else had Gucci bags or at least Samsonite. Our stuff was carried around in plastic buckets and grocery shopping bags. These were pretty nice digs though. We enjoyed the luxury accommodations. But right about then, we made a series of big mistakes that would cost us our fancy living. We played music afternoons and nights. We had a gig at lunchtime, at poolside from 3 to 5 in the afternoon, and in the restaurant at night from 6 to 9. Even though our farm was on another island, we were still farmers, and we would wake up at 5:30 every morning. Then we'd get bored because we didn't have anything else to do. To pass the time, Kiyoki and I would go out and walk along the beach. We started collecting stuff we found. Among other things, we got over 100 snorkels and dozens of mismatched fins. Once we found a $100 bill. We had the place pretty much to ourselves at that hour. We were walking by Black Rock in front of the Sheraton Hotel one morning when we noticed a big school of manini. It's like a striped sturgeon fish, and we liked to eat that either dried or pulehu, broiled, or lawalu style, roasted over an open fire. In Kona, we were farmers, but we were also fishermen going back many generations. We know how to go after all kinds of fish, and we had brought our nets over from the Big Island. So we went back to our hotel, got our fishing gear, and a bag of frozen peas from the kitchen staff. Kiyoki and I walked down the beach carrying our white plastic buckets, our nets, and returned to Black Rock. We climbed upon the rock and started tossing peas into the water. Pretty soon the fish started feeding and we had them in a nice ball. My son threw the net on top of the school and we waded into the water. Kyoki had covered the whole school and we ended up with 4 5-gallon buckets full of fish. This was more fish than we really needed, but in Hawaii, we don't waste food. So we took the fish back to our room. This was our first big mistake. It was pretty early in the hotel, so we went down to the ground floor, swiped some of the rocks used for landscaping around the hotel pond. They were always trimming trees around the place, and we got some wood that was lying around. This is mesquite, and it was great for barbecuing. We took all this stuff back to our room and laid out a little campfire with the rocks in a circle on our balcony so we could cook some fish. I guess this was big mistake number 2. I suppose we should have cleaned our catch by the ocean, but we knew that the tourists were used to watching the fish when they snorkeled. We didn't think they would like seeing us gut the fish and cleaning the fish they thought of as pets or part of the scenery, not food. We really didn't have proper place to clean the fish, so we cleaned them in our bathtub. Big mistake number 3. It took a while to clean all of them, and by the time they were done, the drain in the bathtub wasn't working too well. We found out later that the drains for a good part of the hotel were all plugged with fish guts. It was pretty horrible. Now we had a bathtub full of fish. We sliced them in half down the middle, salted them down, and we strung lines all throughout our hotel room. We got clothing pins and hung the fish on the lines to dry. Big mistake number 4. We weren't really aware of the odors building up in the room. By this time, not just the room, but the whole damn hall smelled like fish. While the fish were drying, we lit off our fire. We took the wire shelf from our minibar refrigerator, laid it across the rocks in a barbecue grill, and we had to wait for the fire to burn down to get some good coals for cooking. We were still pretty sandy from our fishing expedition, and the tub was full of fish guts that weren't really draining too well. So we went down to the hotel pool to take a dip and clean ourselves off. We took our time because we knew it was going to be a while before the wood burned down enough for cooking. On our way back to our room, we noticed all of this action going on in front of the hotel. There was an ambulance, police cars, and a fire engine. We didn't realize at first that there was any connection to us. To make a long story short, this was just a little old campfire. The fire department had busted out their big hose to put out the fire. In fact, they end up hitting the thing with so much water, they washed the whole campfire right off the balcony and almost broke the windows too. At this point, the hotel's assistant manager showed up. He's the guy who's in charge of the rooms. He can't believe what's going on. The whole hotel smells like fish. There's fire hoses and water. And the hotel drains are all plugged up. I told them the story of what happened, that we were all just trying to cook some fish. In the end, we got kicked out of the hotel, and later on, big mistake number 5, we found out that the area in front of Black Rock was some kind of marine sanctuary, and that if you fish there, it's a $10,000 fine. We moved out of the hotel 2 days later, and back to more familiar surroundings for us, the Honokohau Valley at the 36 marker on the north shore of Maui. Sometimes it's hard for a native Hawaiian to live in the regular world. Now, for some context to this story. When he says he moved to Honokohau Valley in North Maui on the North Shore, it's a place where a lot of people who wanted to disconnect from the modern world moved when they were living on Maui. And it's where at my time my grandma was living. She had her wonderful tree house that she and her husband built many, many years ago. And she had a little apartment downstairs. And so that's where he and his entire family moved. And after living there for quite a while as a tenant of hers, he wrote a song about the place, talking about the many dogs that lived there and the wonderful people in the valley, even a slightly flattering song about her. And yeah, so that's just some context for the story. What he also doesn't mention is that a lot of their family moved with them into that hotel. They started off on the top floor, and each month they got downgraded. And part of why they were allowed to stay there for so long, for about 5 or 6 months, was because the manager at the time had said, yeah, move in, take as much time as you need until you get settled and find a place of your own. Well, they took their time. 5 or 6 months. They never found a place. They just liked the hotel too much. And so, yeah, that's a story about a friend of the family, written in his own words. Hope you enjoyed. Blooper time, brah. Get it.